Okay, it's going.
Cool.
Okay, please state your name, your major, your year, and where you're from.
My name is Ozzie Williams. My current major is sociology, but I just switched from design, technology, theater. I'm a sophomore, and I am from Rochester Hills, Michigan, which I don't, it's right around here. Um, yeah.
Okay, Ozzie, it's good to be with you. What did you expect from this class before the year started? I know you're a sophomore, and you said when we were talking, you took 189, and this class isn't the same, but
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of similar. So, what did you expect from this one coming in?
Yeah, honestly, I expected a lot of reading, a lot of papers, because that's how 189 was, because I took it with Bartlett. And I just really liked him as a professor. And then I ended up dropping one of my core classes and was like, oh, shoot, I can add an honors class. So I added this class because it was what Bartlett taught. And then it's also like, it's an interesting subject. Like, I'm in a lot of like, online communities where they talk about like racism and anti-racism and, a lot of like human rights type of conversations. So I expected to learn a lot, and I definitely did. But, that's just like what I expect from Bartlett as a professor in general.
Right.
So,
So you said Rochester Hills, Michigan, correct?
yes.
What was that like for you growing up? Just
Um,
how it was around you and what type of people were there.
yeah, it's definitely like a suburbia. It's 30 minutes north of Detroit. Um, it's like predominantly white, depending on where you are. Rochester Hills is kind of the richer part. I didn't grow up like here. I grew up in Auburn Hills, Pontiac, which is like a little, I think north. I'm bad at directions, but it's a little further away. And there it was more diverse. I went to a high school that was pretty diverse, even though it was predominantly white. Like there were still, specifically Black and Hispanic people in my classes. So like it wasn't like a homogenous place. Um, and like I did get a few talks from like my parents when I was growing up about like specific things, like, not saying slurs, obviously, was a big one. And like my parents both voted for Obama in 2008. So they were like those liberals that were like, the white, well meaning liberals, but they didn't really think about a lot of things. And then like the biggest, like, uh, like moment, like light bulb moment for me was in my 11th grade AP Lang course where we read Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and we had to read one of his essays for this class. But yeah, it was the first time that I was like, oh, like race is a big deal. Like, like it really allowed me to see from another perspective and like think about whiteness specifically, because before then I'd kind of been like, okay, well, I'm white, period. Like that's all there is to it. Um, but yeah, it really helped me like see how everything is racialized. Um, yeah.
So you had that light bulb moment in your 11th grade year. So after that, did you start to have conversations with family or friends about it? Did you before that have any conversations? What happened after that light bulb moment?
I would say like before then I had thought about it. Like, I was like, well, everyone deserves equal rights. Very like this kind of like nebulous idea of like, equity and equality. But after that, like I started, doing more research, I guess. I started reading more um like articles about race, like just being more involved and informed about it. I don't think, like, I've definitely talked more to some people about race after then, but I don't think I really had, like, I had like a lot of well-meaning ideas. I just didn't have the tools or like the, I guess, the resources to talk about them, kind of like we talked about in your interview.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So, and you said you went to a pretty diverse high school.
Yeah.
Were there any moments that where you experienced racism or witnessed any racism there or in other spaces?
Yes. I mean, like, there were there was one time where me and my friend Amare were hanging out, and we were both in drumline together and on the bus or whatever, and then we both got in trouble afterwards, and the teacher called us racist and homophobic, and I'm part of the LGBT plus
Mm.
community and she's black, and we were like, huh, us? No. But it was just him like projecting onto us. And I think part of the reason that we got in trouble was because of those things, that we were just like,
Mm.
you know, minorities hanging out. And then there was definitely times like when there was like weave in the hallways, right? Or like stuff like that. You probably didn't experience that at your high school, but
Not
yeah,
too much, no.
and it was just like, thinking that like that's dirty or that's gross or whatever. And there was a lot of like casual microaggressions too, especially from, I saw it a lot from black black guys to black girls. Um, and I think that like within the school there's a pretty big like class divide. I wouldn't say like huge, but like there were people like black men who lived in the suburbs would treat black women who lived in more low income areas as like really shittily
Mm.
and stuff like that. But I think that's just like, I don't know if that was necessarily like racialized on purpose, but like also like class problems, and
Mm.
also just high schoolers being shitty.
Yeah.
So there's definitely instances of that.
So you talked a little bit about microaggressions. I want to ask you, because for me, I know we talked about in my interview how, I didn't really come from a diverse place. And so I took the lesson on microaggressions I took it really important as a really important thing because, I'm going to go out and I'm going to see these people. I'll need to be prepared for those types of things. So for you, you said that was common. Um, and I know I took microaggressions as the most important lesson, but what lesson in the material for you uh, stood out the most?
I think for me, it was specifically like talking about whiteness, and then the intersection of class and race and place. Those were the two big ones.
Mhm.
Whiteness for me was something to think about because, like, previously, I don't think I understood how harmful like default whiteness was. Like, obviously, I didn't like, I talked about it, and like you know, sort of covered it in that AP Lang course, but this class really helped expand on that for me, and like kind of um, make more sense. I don't
Mhm.
know. That's not like a really
Yeah.
great way of putting it, but it made more of an impact now that I kind of like have more material to talk about. Um, and then race, class, and place was important just because like I often think about class. That is like my primary lens when viewing things. So seeing the intersection was, I don't want to say interesting, but it was just like upsetting and
Mhm.
kind of surprising, I guess. Like, it wasn't surprising, but it was like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense that a lot of people, specifically black people, don't have that generational wealth that a lot of times white people do. And then also that poor whites also experience a lot of problems, just
Yeah.
poor people in general. And then that intersection with the racialization, and then where they live specifically having a big impact, because Bartlett had talked about in 189, which is like all about borders and stuff. um he talked about like how where people lived had a big effect on them, and how like movement um can really like negatively affect people if there are borders or like systems in place to stop them. um So yeah, I thought that was just interesting because it makes me like look at all of like the small towns, or like what people consider ghettos, right?
Hmm.
Like, that is that is, I guess maybe endemic would be the right word, of like a systematic issue. Like you can see the systematic racism in that, and like the loans and stuff. So that was big for me.
And so, as we talk about just everything we've learned in this class, it's all just kind of the whole over the summer with everything that went on. It was kind of like not a good time to have the class, but it just went right along with kind of the movement that was going on. So, as 2020 kind of wraps up here, Ozzie, whether it's the pandemic or anything like that, or whatever happened over this summer, how's it kind of just enforced your ideas, or has it shaped anything? Has it changed
Yeah, I
any of your
think
ideas?
I don't think, I wouldn't say changed. Like we were talking about, like we both had kind of the right ideas,
Hmm.
but not necessarily the backup to enforce them or like persuade people. Um, but yeah, I definitely think like Black Lives Matter specifically this summer, um, and the buzz that like surrounded all that, and how it kind of died down after a while. Like
Yeah.
it still should be going, and we still should be talking about Black Lives Matter. And like obviously the fight doesn't stop if the marches stop. And like,
Hmm.
and I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about, like performative activism, etc. But specifically, like I think that now is a really good time for me to have taken this class, specifically because like it just it really does just enforce like all of the right ideas that we have, like how like racism is bad and here's why,
Yeah.
like racism affects everything in America and here's how, and I think that's really important to talk about, because if we want to change things, I think we should be able to look at our history and say, okay, this is wrong, this is wrong.
Right.
um and these are these come straight from racism.
I think
So
it's yeah.
yeah.
I think it's one thing to say, that I can sit here and say that I want equality, and I want everyone to have an equal chance at everything. But on the flip side of that, when you say that, you have to know why we've gotten in the position where we are, and
Yeah.
this class does exactly that. It shows us how we've gotten to this point. From the 1600s all the way to now, how it's just
Yeah. And
going on.
I think part of the biggest like problem with saying, I want everyone to be equal, everyone deserves the same things, is like you don't necessarily know how to change things or have an action plan. I feel like before this class I was like, okay, these are all really good ideas and I support them, but how are we going to forward them? And I think especially on Tuesday, when we talked about how like policy recommendations for a platform of anti-racism, like it made it seem much more realistic of a goal rather than like idealistic, which was really important to me, because it's one thing to say like all people matter, we should give everyone rights, and then a completely different thing to like, okay, so systematic racism has affected all of us, here's X, Y, and Z that we can do to help like curb that and help further anti-racism in the US specifically.
So speaking of kind of putting things into motion and getting the ball rolling on actually acting on some of these things, did you partake in any anti-racist actions or activities this year? And if not, just talk about Ball State as a whole, as kind of what they can do to keep pushing the envelope on these issues.
Yeah, I went to a Black Lives Matter protest this summer, um, which was like the first kind of step that I took beyond like posting on social media and stuff, is to actually go out and organize. Besides that, I guess like the biggest anti-racist like activity I guess that I've been doing is trying to like talk to people and talk to my friends and like tell them what I've learned. Like my sister the other day was like, I'm Caucasian. And I was like, actually, that is incorrect. You are just white. Because we talked about like the definition of Caucasian in this class.
Mm-hmm.
And as for Ball State, I don't know. The thing is, like, it's predominantly white. A lot of the administrators are white. I feel like that we need more. I don't know necessarily, but I feel like we need more diversity in our professors outside of, you know, specific departments. Like, I want to see like people at the top, like with where Jeffrey Burns is, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels very white and white based. And obviously, like, I know that we benefit from whiteness as a predominantly white institution. But I think that there is more diversity and we need to like think about it more. And after we talked to Bobby from the Multicultural Center, I think I'm gonna like try and get involved.
Mm-hmm.
But also it's hard because of the pandemic
Right.
to, you know, kind of organize, especially like that. But yeah.
One of the things that I've just kind of heard in our discussions in class is just about how, you know, when incidents may happen on campus and it's kind of just, you know, a statement from the top is, you know, we don't condone those things, but there's no kind of just action to stop those. And I think maybe we could both agree that, you know, that's something that we would like to see too, is just kind of a firmer stance on some of the things that happen. But
Yeah, I think like just saying, hey, this professor did a racist thing and that's bad. I would like to see maybe some consequence.
mhm,
Because that's, you know, like you can't just be like, they did a bad thing. Okay, then punish them or else
right.
they're going to keep doing the bad thing. Like, I don't know, maybe not punish is the right word. Maybe like have consequences for your actions.
Mhm,
Um, but yeah, like I think, especially last year, we had an incident and it was really frustrating because they were like, yeah, this is bad. We at Ball State do not condone the action. Like, okay, then do something about it besides
right.
like placating your students.
Mhm,
And I think that as we've kind of talked about in the Thursday sessions, like students have a lot of power to lobby for things that they want and they don't realize it. So I don't know. I don't know if there's like a way that we can like kind of circumvent the university and organizes students like specifically to get what we want,
mhm.
because you know if it's affiliated with the university that's different, but that's like all politics and whatever. But I've been thinking about that a lot, and specifically like organizing um, and like how that works.
Mhm. Um, so we just talked about Ball State where it is right now. I think it's hard to answer where it's going to be in a couple years, but in my interview, when you interviewed me, I talked about the U.S. and maybe you could just give a greater grasp on what, you know, we're entering a new administration. Not sure how that's going to go, but um, if you want to talk about where you think the U.S. will be in 5 years, or talk about where you see yourself in a couple years because of this class or just other interactions that you've had.
Yeah, for the US, I think now is a really interesting time because I feel like Biden didn't really run on a platform of his own. He just ran against Trump, if that makes sense. So I think there's a lot that we the people hopefully can do to kind of persuade him towards more anti-racist action. Hypothetically, I would like in 5 to 10 years to have some type of universal health care, because we talked about how um, the privatization of healthcare like has racist undertones slash disproportionately affects people of color and indigenous people. And as for myself, I'm definitely gonna be out there. I hope. Hopefully, the pandemic will go away enough that we can community organize. And if not, I'll figure something out where I can talk about anti-racism. And I definitely will constantly be thinking about the stuff we learned about in this class. But I think the biggest thing for me is remembering to like keep educating myself even after, this class because we talked a lot about, not a lot, but we talked about how people in the 90s who were like, I don't see color, thought they were really progressive. And then come the 2010s, like, we don't use that language anymore because it's racist. So I want to make sure that I'm not one of those people who like, oh yeah, I was progressive in my time when I was coming up, but now I'm, you know, kind of center. So
Right.
I want to make sure I'm not like that, because that would be really frustrating for me.
Yeah. Ozzie, I think this is more of a personal question from me to you, but me personally, there's not a lot of activism that goes on where I'm from. And like you said, you just kind of started getting going on, like going to a protest and kind of getting involved. So is there any advice that you could give me as far as starting to get involved in these things? Whether it is something like a march or like something I can do on my own. I know one thing I have done is I have donated to a couple organizations that, you know, for example, and Black trans women organizations. I have donated to some of those. So is there anything else that you could like kind of just guide me on to get involved?
Yeah. So there's a few different things. Organizing, like, I found my protest through a Facebook group, and also just talking to my friends. So like definitely like talk to your friends, tell them about things. Facebook is a great resource for organizing. And then also, this is more political, but canvassing, like you get a few friends together and go door to door and try and do like grassroots canvassing. It's gonna be like immensely more effective, because you're talking to a real person and you're saying, hey, this is what this candidate stands for and this is how it can help you, stuff like that. And I also think like being involved in online communities is good. Like it's definitely like a bonus, and I'm involved in a lot and I like to hear commentary like all the time. But I also think like going outside and just talking to people is a big thing, and just bringing up these conversations like we're having now, obviously more casual than this, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of just about like going out there and just doing it. Like, I don't know, I also had this roadblock earlier where I was like, well, organizing seems so hard, and it's like, well, once you get like 5 friends together, that's a lot of change that you can accomplish right there, like especially for a community. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Ozzie, is there anything that you want to add just about the class, Ball State, anything in general before we wrap it up?
uh, sure, you should definitely take 199. But also like having conversations about anti-racism is important. And I think the most important takeaway is that anti-racism is not a bad thing. Anti-racism is important because it combats racism. And really, it is an American ideal because it stands for freedom and liberty and justice. So yeah.
Well, Ozzie, thanks for your time and good luck with the rest of the semester. And it was
Thank
good
you.
talking to you today.
Thank you.